Bezat Hashem, we are continuing on today in Masechet Sanhedrin with Chet Amud Aleph. We are going to start Amar Kakaton Kagadol Tishme'un, which is the fourth line in Chet Amud Aleph. We're going to have three sections in today's learning. The first section is a continuum from yesterday, talking about certain halachot that apply to judges in their practice. The second section will specifically focus in on Moshe Rabbeinu and how he dealt with certain scenarios relating to judgment. And we'll also get into other related topics. And then the third section, towards the bottom of the page, will tie back into the Mishnah, where it spoke about the number 3 judges for different things. And we'll get back to, away from the Agarata and back to the Mishnah and discussing these halachot of requirements of 3 judges. Now, yesterday we finished off, before we start, so our learning today should be Refuah Shlema for Yaakov ben Dinah, speedily and quick. He should have a speedily and quick recovery, Bezat Hashem. We're starting the fourth line on the page, Kakadon Kagadol Tishma'un. Yesterday we finished off talking about certain halachot that judges need to keep. So just to remember, we spoke about how they're not allowed to have favoritism, right? If there's bias, they're not allowed to adjudicate that case, whether that's a positive bias or a negative bias, a friend or an enemy. And we pick up Kakaton Kagadol Tishme'un. It says in the pasuk, like the small one or the large one, they shall hear. So what is this referring to? Amar Reish Lakish says, Sheyehe chaviv alecha din shel pruta kedin shel mea maneh. The judges are required to be dear, that it should be dear to you. Moshe was telling the judges that you should take seriously the case of a pruta, of a small amount of money, like the case of 100 maneh, a lot of money. So the Gemara says, what does it mean that they have to treat it with the same care? If it means that they have to analyze it, umifsike, and they have to paskin with truth and clarity, the same way it's a lot of money, also with a small amount of money, with a small claim. So the Gemara says, Pshita, that's obvious. If the chidush of the pasuk is just to tell us that they have to take it with the same severity and focus and treat it with the same necessity to conclude with the truth, that you don't need a pasuk to teach me that. Ella, so the Gemara says, rather, what is it teaching us? La'akdumei. It means in terms of precedence. So Rashi explains it, but what that means is, if claims come in front of the judges, and there's a small claim that comes first, and then a larger claim, or a big court case, a lot of money, that comes second, so you adjudicate the case that came first. Even though this might be a $10 claim, and the next one that arrived after could be $100 million, it doesn't make a difference. Kakaton kagadol tishma'un, you have to treat it with the same respect and the same severity and reverence, and therefore you'd have to adjudicate the smaller case first because they arrive first in court. Now, this we'll read the parentheses over here, although some take it out. This is actually a reference back to the Tosefta on Vav Amud Bet that we quoted a long Tosefta at the end. There were these halachot. We said, Lo taguru mipnei ish, you shall not be scared of any man. So we had different ways of understanding this. Amar Rabbi Chanin, al tachnis devarech mipnei ish. Says Rabbi Chanin, we saw, this was the Tosefta at the bottom of Vav Amud Bet. He says this refers to the fact that if somebody knows some sort of a zechut or a chova, a merit or a demerit, that he could say in order to help or hurt the litigants in a case, he has to speak up. He shouldn't withhold his words, which in the context of the Tosefta, we were saying, even if it's a student in front of his Rebbe and his Rebbe is adjudicating the case, he has to speak up. If he knows some information that could benefit or the opposite, he has to speak up. Ki ha-mishpat le'elokim hu, continues the Gemara, the justice is for Hashem. So what is this teaching us? Amar Rabbi Chanina, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu says as follows: when you adjudicate and you make a wrong psak, and you create a imbalance in justice, lo dayan, you're actually not just for the litigants at hand here that you're damaging, but ha-mishpat le'elokim hu, you're making it hard for me. Justice is for Hashem. Now what does that mean? Lo dayan l'rashayim shenotlin mizeh mamon v'notlin lazeh shelo kedin. Not only is it that these wicked judges, that they're taking money from one and giving it to the other inappropriately, they're doing the wrong thing. Ela shematrichin oti lachzir mamon leba'alav. But now they're creating kivyachol as if to say, bother. They're creating a annoyance or a bother for me that now I have to figure out how to have the money returned with all of the occurrences that could possibly happen in the appropriate way so that the fellow who ended up losing money inappropriately gets his money back. So you're not just bothering or inconveniencing or troubling the litigants, but you're actually a mishpat le'elokim where you're causing me trouble as well. Okay. Now, the Gemara moves on into the second section, which really is a continuum of discussion of the judges, but in particular, we'll see as it relates to Moshe Rabbeinu, and we're going to speak about a few different incidences. Very interesting Agarata here. It says in the beginning of Devarim, Moshe Rabbeinu, when they set up the court system, so he explained that the lower courts will take care of the cases they understand and can adjudicate. V'adavar asher yikshe mikem, and then the more difficult cases that perhaps you have difficulty with will be brought to Moshe Rabbeinu. That's what he said, and he'll deal with them. So the Gemara assumes at this point that Moshe Rabbeinu, in a certain way, said words here that were considered inappropriate. He used, he elevated himself, or it was a certain sense of, as Rashi says, he took srara, he took authority. It was like a ga'ava almost. Meaning, really, he should have said, takrivun lifnei hashchina. He should have said, they'll be brought in front of the Shechina, meaning I'll bring it there and then we'll figure out what there is to do. But instead, as the Gemara interprets now, takrivun elai, they'll be brought to me, there was a certain element that was inappropriate in saying that, and because of that, Moshe Rabbeinu was punished. But let's see. They'll be brought to me. Instead, he should have said, takrivun lifnei hashchina, they'll be brought in front of the Shechina. Because Moshe used words that implied a certain authority or a certain personal position or pedigree, he was punished. And how was he punished? Because later when we talk about the Benot Tzlafchad, actually earlier in Bamidbar, but when we speak about Benot Tzlafchad, the Pasuk tells us, Vayakrev Moshe et mishpatan lifnei Hashem. The daughters of Tzlafchad, these were girls that came in front of Moshe, claiming that they should receive a portion in Eretz Yisrael. Why? Their father had passed away, and as they noted, it wasn't within the sin of Korach and his congregation. It wasn't with the sinner Jews, but rather their father passed away, and there's actually a machloket, which we'll touch on in a minute, what his sin was. But the bottom line is that they said if he's not going to get a portion, and there's no brothers. So Rashi explains in the Torah that they were chachamot. They were actually intelligent, very intelligent women, and they argued as follows. Either our mother should then do yibum if there's no boys, and we're not therefore fitting to get a portion of the land, and when there's yibum, so then there will still be some nachala within the family. Alternatively, if she can't do yibum, and then the girls would make it that there's no yibum situation, which actually is the halacha, so then we should be able to inherit, like boys, a portion of the land of Israel. Pasuk tells us, Moshe brought their judgment in front of Hashem. He didn't know the answer. Now, the simple pshat that we're learning right now, the way that Rabbi Chanina or Rabbi Yoshia is explaining it is, the reason that he was forced to go ask what to do in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and this halacha was only taught, as Rashi explains. He didn't merit that this halacha of nachalot, of inheritance, really, which is what it touches on, until he didn't merit to say this on his own until the daughters of Tzlafchad came proposing this issue, and then he had to go to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so it was taught through them. Why didn't he merit for it to be taught by himself? Because initially when the Beit Din had been set up, Batei Dinim had been set up, he took authority to himself, which was inappropriate. This seems to be some sort of an issue or some sort of a lapse in the right way of speaking, and therefore later when the Benot Tzlafchad presented their case, he didn't merit that this halacha of nachalot of inheritance was taught by himself, but rather through the Benot Tzlafchad. Matkifler of Nachman Bar Yitzchak, so Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, I don't really understand. The shortcoming here does not appear to be a shortcoming at all. You're saying he did something wrong. It's not really true, because Miktiv Ashmi Achem, he doesn't say in the Torah, and I'll cause you to hear, or I'll make it known to you. Meaning, if you don't understand what to do, bring it to me, and I'll tell you what to do. That's not what Moshe Rabbeinu says, but rather, V'shamativ Ktiv. Rather, he says, I'll hear. Now, what does he mean, I'll hear? He means it's I gamirna. If I know it, I know the answer, so I'll tell you. Ve'i lo, but if I don't know, azilna vegamirna. I'll go and learn from Hashem, and then I'll bring it back to you. Meaning the point is, this wasn't really gava. Moshe was just saying there's certain things that I know. If I know the answers that are more difficult cases, so I'll be happy to help. And if not, he's admitting I might not know, and then I'll bring it to Hashem and he'll help me out. So it wasn't gava really. We can't say that there was an issue of him taking srara, authority for himself, and that's inappropriate. Rather, the Gemara says then, so what is the reason indeed that the story of the Nachalot, the halachot relating to inheritance, particularly in Eretz Yisrael, why was it taught through the daughters of Tzlafchad and not by Moshe himself? So the Gemara tells a beautiful drasha here, Elokei. Rather, it's like the Braita teaches. Ruya parashat Nachalot she'tichatev al yedei Moshe Rabbeinu. It was really fitting that, like the rest of the Torah, the story of the inheritance of the Eretz Yisrael, of Nachalot in general, should have been taught through Moshe Rabbeinu without Benot Tzlafchad, the daughters of Tzlafchad, taking that merit. Eloi, Ela shezachu Benot Tzlafchad benichtav al yadan. The daughters of Tzlafchad merit, it was a special merit. It wasn't because of any shortcoming of Moshe, but it was a special merit that the daughters of Tzlafchad had, and the parasha, the section dealing with inheritance of the land, was written through them, based on their incident. So the Mefarshim speak out, what was it that made them merit such an amazing thing? There's very few people that can say section of the Torah was written through them, like Yitro, story of Judges was written through him. It's a tremendous thing. So the Mefarshim speak out, I believe Rashi on the Torah quotes this as well, because they loved Eretz Yisrael, shechivevu et haaretz. They loved Eretz Yisrael, and therefore, when it came to the inheritance of Eretz Yisrael, Kadosh Baruch Hu gave them a special zechut that the halachot of Nachalot was written through them. Not because of a shortcoming of Moshe Rabbeinu, but rather because they loved the land of Israel so much, the parasha, the section dealing with Nachalot, with inheritance, was written through them in an incident relating to them. It's an amazing thing happens to be. You know, we live in Galut, we live in Chutz La'aretz, we live in the diaspora, but we can't forget, every day we daven, if we think about it even, Ve'lerushalayim irecha berachamim tashuv, Hashem, rebuild your holy city, rebuild the temple, rebuild Eretz Yisrael as it was back in the day. We have a tremendous opportunity today that the Rishonim didn't even have to go and Bichlal be in Eretz Yisrael. But every day when we pray, and every day we should think about Shechivevu et haaretz, is a tremendous thing to love the land of Israel, to yearn to be there, and obviously in the greatest sense with Mashiach. It's a tremendous thing. They loved Eretz Yisrael and they inherited, they had the zechut, the merit that the parasha of Nachalot was written through them. And similarly, continues the Braita, Ru'uya, and similarly, Ru'uya ita parashat Mikoshesh etikatev al yedei Moshe Rabbeinu. The parasha, the section dealing with Mikoshesh, should have been written through Moshe Rabbeinu. Who is the Mikoshesh? Mikoshesh was a fellow who did melacha on Shabbat. He did work on Shabbat. As to the nature of his work, that's a machloket in the Gemara. So he gathered sticks. That's a simple pshat. But either way, he did some sort of a melacha. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu knew that if somebody does melacha, does forbidden labor on Shabbat, he's chayav mitah. But he didn't know which mitah, he didn't know which death. So he brought that in front of Hashem. Hashem said, you give him skila. So really, it should have been taught that the punishment for melacha on Shabbat is skila through Moshe Rabbeinu. Ela shenitchayev mikoshesh v'nichteva al yado. But because the mikoshesh, the one who did melacha on Shabbat, that fellow in the Torah, the section that deals with that, he did something wrong. He did an isur on Shabbat. So he was, in a certain way, punished in a certain sense, that the section that explains to us what the punishment of death will be for such a person was written through him. Because he was liable, he did something negative, the parasha was written through him as well. Which teaches you that Hashem rolls liability or negativity over somebody that's already liable, and merit on or through somebody over somebody who is innocent. There's a concept that emerges from this, is that the Mikoshesh who did something negative, so for all of eternity, we read the Torah, the section that tells us the punishment of death for doing melacha on Shabbat, we learn it from the Mikoshesh. Whereas the Benot Tzlafchad, who were so meritorious that they had this beautiful love of Eretz Yisrael, we learned the parasha of Nachalot, the parasha of inheritance of the land, through the Benot Tzlafchad, who were meritorious. side point here, which is fascinating, is there is a shita in the Gemara that says the Mikoshesh Eitzim, that fellow is actually the father of these girls, of Benot Slavchad. He was actually their father, and they were saying he didn't die with the dispute of Korach, but actually he died because of his own sin, a separate thing, which was that he did some sort of a melacha on Shabbat. Very interesting that these two stories are actually very interconnected. This concept, by the way, Stam, just on the side, of Megalgelin Chova Yidei Chayav and Schut Al Yidei Zakai, it's a tremendous lesson in life in general. When we do something, even if we do it by accident, we do it wrong, if we were really so innocent, we were such tzaddikim, Hashem wouldn't allow something negative to happen to us. So really, in a certain sense, when a negative thing happens, we do chas v'shalom, we do melacha on Shabbat by accident. Even if it's by accident, we have to realize is if we were so righteous, perhaps we wouldn't do that because Hashem is megalgelin choval yedei chayav. He doesn't bring punishments or wrongdoings through somebody that's totally innocent. And the other way too, if something good happens to us, so it's like HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling us, you're doing good. There's other ways that could be also interpreted, but simply, megalgelin zechut al yedei zakai, Hashem allows us to do good things when we're engaged in practices of doing the good things as well. Let's move on now. Final point over here, final couple points in this section. So, Ktiv, we know there's a contradiction. We're going to make two different ways of showing this, two different sections here, but two different points. There's a contradiction in how Moshe Rabbeinu, in the beginning of Devarim, commands the people. First it says, Ktiv atzavet shoftechem ba'itay. It says, I commanded your judges at that time. And it also says, va'atzavetchem ba'itay. It says, I commanded you, the general populace. So what is the nature of commanding the judges? And what is the nature that Moshe commanded the Jewish people as it relates to the judges? So Amar Belazar, Amar Samloi. Azara, there's two types of warnings that are going on here. The first one is, or Samloi probably. Azara letzibur shetehei emat adin dayan alehen. The first one, which actually the second one, which says, Etchem, I commanded you, that is a warning for the public, you, the public, Shetehei imat dayan alehen, that there has to be a certain level of awe, a certain level of reverence towards the judges that you have. Since the judges are those people who adjudicate the law of Hashem, the word of the Torah, there has to be a reverence that you have, that Tzibur has, towards the judges. Which is an idea is that when you go in to be judged, there has to be a certain level of respect. Interesting today, when the honorable judge walks in, everybody stands up, right? There's a certain level, since they're adjudicating law, they're going to tell us how things are. And it's for sure, in Dinei Torah, they're telling us what Hashem is going to paskin, actually. So therefore, we have to have reverence towards them. That's v'atzavetchem. But the next one, v'atzavet shoftechem, what is that referring to? The first one, v'azara ledayan sheyisbol et hatzibur. And the flip side of that also is that the judge also has to have patience and tolerate the public, which means there has to be a certain sensitivity and tolerance that the judges have towards the community as well. Ad kama, says the Gemara, how much does the judge really need to tolerate the people? So, Rabbi Chanan v'item Rabbi Shabtai, the pasuk tells us, actually it's when Hashem talks to Moshe Rabbeinu, Ka'asher, when he tells him, this is what you're going to do, this is what you're going to be held accountable for. Ka'asher yisao min et hayonek. Moshe actually, I think he was complaining in the context there. But he says, it's like a nurse carrying a suckling child, meaning that the judges who adjudicate law, they have to recognize their role as like a nursemaid. It's like a person who takes care of a little baby. That's their job as judges, and they have to have such tolerance and patience in dealing with the people. Now, moving on, another contradiction. On one hand, the pasuk tells us when Moshe commands Yoshua about his role. You know, Moshe Rabbeinu passed away in the 40th year. Actually, the end of the 40th year. We know his yahrzeit is coming up in Adar. Zayin Adar, the 7th of Adar, it's coming up now actually. And Adar is Rishon and Sheni, but it's coming up. And when he commands Yoshua, you're going to take over now, before the Jews cross over into Eretz Yisrael, and you are going to lead them. You're going to guide them as the leader. Now there's a contradiction how he commands Yoshua. First pasuk says, Ki ata tavo. It says, you will, now tavo means bring them, but the way it's interpreted is, you'll go along with them. It means it's like you'll be one of the people. But it also says, a few psukim after, Ki ata tavi. You will Tavi is more of a language of srara, of authority. You'll be the authoritative force. You'll be over the people, guiding the people with more of an authority. So how do we understand this? Rabbi Yochanan Amar Lo Moshe LiYoshua. Moshe said to Yoshua, Ata v'azkenim shebedori mahem. You will guide the people along with the zkenim, which Rashi explains over here means al piem aseh maaseh velo tistarer aleihem, meaning you will take the guidance of the people. It'll be a democracy. You, Yoshua, will listen to the zkenim, the elders, and through that you'll guide the people. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but that's atat tavo. You'll come with them. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but Hashem said to Yoshua, Tol makal, take a stick, v'hachal kod kadam, and smack them on their head. Dabar echad ledor, you have one leader for a generation, eshnei dabarim ledor, not two leaders for a generation. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, atat tavi, you will have to guide them, you will have to be in the position of authority in order to succeed in guiding the Jewish people. You can't be one of the guys, you can't have the Sanhedrin assisting you and you'll just be one of the people, but you actually have to guide them as the great leader. That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Yoshua ben Nun. We actually find later, when the Jews cross over into Eretz Yisrael, the beginning of Sefer Yoshua, we find that Yoshua, at least HaKadosh Baruch Hu held him accountable because he didn't necessarily do it in this way, which is when they went to battle against the Ai, which was a certain city, they lost the battle, and one of the reasons Rashi brings down is because Yoshua was supposed to go in front. He had to be the leader in charge in front, and he didn't do it over there, and they lost that battle. Eventually, they won after, but the point is, he had to be the authoritative figurehead, couldn't just be one of the people. Okay, let's move on to the third and final section here. Now, we had said in the Mishnah, this is a reference back actually, Mishnah spoke about extensively cases that require, types of cases that require 3 judges. So we said many different scenarios. So now the Braita teaches us in reference to that. Tana, the Braita teaches zimun b'shlosha. Zimun also requires 3 people. Now, in general, the word zimun, which the Gemara assumes in a moment, refers to birkat zimun. What is birkat zimun? Birkat zimun is the blessing of zimun. When people eat together, 3 people, the Gemara Masechet Brachot teaches us that there was the requirement of to gather together their blessing, which means that before Birkat HaMazon, actually, there would be an introductory blessing that was said, which we say today still, Rabotai Nevarech, etc. And what they do is it gathers together the blessing of all 3 of them into a group. So the Gemara says, when it says in the Braita, zimun is with 3, my zimun, what is zimun? Ilema birkat zimun, if it means that blessing said before Birkat HaMazon, to gather the 3 people's blessing together, the Birkat HaMazon together. The problem is, v'hatanya, but there's a second Braita that says, zimun u birkat zimun b'shlosha. It separates, it says zimun, and birkat zimun requires 3 people. Now if zimun is birkat zimun, so then that's repetitive. Obviously it's 2 different things. But maybe you'll say, Prusheka mefarish. Maybe really the second Braita means to say, zimun, what is zimun? Birkat zimun. It's an explanation, but it is the same thing. My zimun, birkat zimun. The problem with saying that is, V'atanya, we have a third Braita that clearly separates these 2. Because the Braita says, the third Braita says, zimun b'shlosha. It says zimun requires 3 people. Birkat zimun b'shlosha, and birkat zimun also requires 3 people. So says the Gemara, clearly, zimun and birkat zimun are 2 different things. Birkat zimun is, like we said, you need 3 people to gather the birkat hamazon together. But zimun, that's something else. Well, what is that referring to? It's elamai zimun, azmune ledin. Very interesting halacha. If somebody goes to court, and he tells the court that I want you to summon, which is a hazmana, it's a summon. I want you to summon that fellow to court because of some sort of a case that I need you to adjudicate between me and him. So the court will send the messenger of the court to go and summon the other fellow to court. Now, if he summons the other fellow to court and he does not come, Beit Din has the legal right to put the other fellow into excommunication. You're misarev, you're refusing to show up like we summoned you, we're allowed to put you into nidui, put you into excommunication. However, in order for it to be a proper hazmana, a proper summons that would allow the court then to put him into excommunication should he not come to court, it has to be that the shliach says, I'm summoning you in the names of these three judges. But if he only says it in the name of one of them, that's not considered a hazmana. Let's read that inside again. So the Gemara says, in order to be a proper summons, that if he doesn't listen, you could put him in excommunication, it needs to be said in the name of the three judges. Like Rava said, if you have a court of three judges that's sitting in session, and the shliach goes of the court, and he says to the person who's being summoned, only by the word of one of them, means by one of the judges I'm summoning you, that's not considered effective. However, the Gemara qualifies this statement. Until it's said in the name of all three, he has to summons in the name of all three. But Hani Mili says the Gemara qualifies below Yuma de Dina. We know Ezra and his Beit Din arranged that there were 2 days in the week, Monday and Thursday, that the court would sit in session and adjudicate the cases that came in front of them. This was a kfiyut, the regularity. Could be they judged other days in a less permanent fashion, but in a regular sense, Ezra and his courts established Monday and Thursdays was the day that the courts should convene. So if it's not the Monday and Thursday when the courts usually convene, you have to say it in the name of all three for it to be a real summons. But if it's that Monday or Thursday when the courts would always convene, leaving this out would not disregard the summons, because it's obvious that you're being summoned by the court as that's the day that they are in session. So even if you wouldn't say in the name of three, it would be considered a legitimate summons that would put the guy in excommunication should he not listen to it. Side note here, this idea of the days that Ezra established has applicable halachot to Masechet Megillah, actually, which we're learning Baruch Hashem in advance of Purim. We're going to get where we learned about how the villages outside of the big cities used to come in on Monday and Thursday, which Rashi learns was to be judged, because those were the days that the courts were established to be in session by Ezra and his courts, and they were given certain leniencies about reading the Megillah earlier than the 14th, as we learned in Masechet Megillah. Let's move on. Bezrat Hashem. Let's continue. This is tying back to the Mishnah. So now we said in the Mishnah, Tashlum Kefel Chulei. We said in the Mishnah that the payments of double, which is when a thief steals and he's caught, a thief, a ganav, steals, is a surreptitious thief, not a gazlan who steals outright. He has to pay 2 times, and we said in the Mishnah, if somebody steals a sheep or an ox, he has to pay 4 or 5 times. If he sells it or slaughters it, fine. These are examples of knas, of penalties, actually. So, in all these examples, the halacha is that you'd have to pay, I don't know if I got lost there for a second. You'd have to pay 2 times or 4 or 5 times. These are examples of penalty. So the Gemara says as follows. In all these games you have to pay 2 times, 4 or 5 times. You need 3 judges to adjudicate that. That's what we said in the Mishnah. Shalach le Rav Nachman bar Rav Chizda le Rav Nachman bar Yaakov. So Rav Nachman bar Rav Chizda sent a message to Rav Nachman bar Yaakov. So the both Rav Nachman, the one who sent the message was the son of Rav Chizda, the one who received it was Rav Nachman bar Yaakov. So he said the following question. Yelamdenu Rabbeinu teach us. He asked Rav Nachman bar Rav Chizda, can you teach us the following halacha? Dine knasot bekama. How many judges are required to adjudicate cases of penalties? Right, this is not regular compensatory like tashlumin, but penalties like kefel, like daled vehei. These are examples of penalties. How many judges need to adjudicate them? So the Gemara's Ma'ikami Boile. What was his question? Ha'anan tanan. We learned in our Mishnah bishlosha. Clearly, our Mishnah says kefel and daled vehei, which are examples of penalties, require 3 judges. So that's not a question. The Amoraim knew the Mishnayot, so clearly that's not a question. El yachid mumche kami ba'ile. What Rav Nachman bar Rav Chizda was asking. Could you have even one mumche, meaning a judge who has smicha, could he even adjudicate it if he has smicha as an individual? Da'in dine knasot, he could adjudicate penalty cases, or is he not allowed to? So Amar Leser of Nachman bar Yaakov responded, Tanitua, you could actually imply it from our Mishnah. Why? Because the Mishnah told us tashlume kefel v'tashlume arba'a v'chamisha b'shlosha. It said regarding double payments, which is penalty, and 4 and 5 times, which is also penalty. You need 3 judges. So my shlosha. Well, what does 3 judges mean? If it means 3 simpleton judges, judges without smicha. That's impossible. Because Amar Avua de Avuch Mishmei Dera, very interesting. He quoted his yichus here. Your father, means Rav Nachman bar Yaakov was saying to Rav Nachman bar Rav Chizda, your father's father, means the father of Rav Chizda, said it Mishmei Derav in the name of Rav, Afilu asara vehin hedyotot, even if you have 10 judges, but they're simple judges, they don't have smicha, they're not allowed to adjudicate cases of penalties. So if the Mishnah says penalties are judged by 3, obviously it's not talking about simpletons, because simpletons can't judge cases of penalty. It must be mumchin. You need professional judges with smicha. And the Mishnah says 3. So you see clearly from our Mishnah that when it comes to adjudicating cases of penalty, it's not sufficient to have one even if he has smicha. You actually need to adjudicate penalty cases 3 judges, and also that they have smicha. And we're going to stop here at the 2 dots towards the bottom of Chet and with Aleph. Bezrat Hashem will continue on tomorrow with towards Chet Amud Bet. And this will be a new sugya, God willing, we'll get to tomorrow. In the meantime, everybody have a wonderful day. Stay good.